My parents uninvited me from Thanksgiving to protect my sister's fake image in front of her billionaire boyfriend. My mother actually told me that my freelance paper pushing gig would embarrass the family and ruin my sister's chances with him. I just smiled, hung up the phone, and went back to running the elite Wall Street intelligence firm her boyfriend had literally just hired to investigate her. When they showed up furiously pounding on my door the very next morning, they had absolutely no idea the trap they had just walked into. My name is Cassidy. I am 33 years old, and I have spent my entire life being the scapegoat for a family that values status over their own flesh and blood. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives who completely underestimated your worth. The phone call came early on a Tuesday morning, just 2 days before Thanksgiving. I was standing in the kitchen of my Manhattan penthouse watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the skyline. The espresso machine was humming softly, filling the air with the rich scent of dark roast coffee. I had just taken my first sip when my phone buzzed on the marble island. Seeing my mother Catherine's name on the screen brought the familiar tight feeling to my chest, a physical reaction to decades of disappointment. I answered with a simple greeting, but she did not bother with pleasantries. "I canceled your flight, Cassidy," my mother said, her voice sharp and unapologetic. I stared at the phone for a second, processing the words. I had not asked her to book my flight to Connecticut, but she always insisted on controlling the travel arrangements for family holidays so she could dictate exactly when everyone arrived and departed. I asked her why she would do that, keeping my tone perfectly level. Her sigh was loud and theatrical, meant to convey how exhausting she found my mere existence. "Brittany wants Jamal to make a good first impression," she explained, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper as if we were discussing state secrets. "He is a very prominent venture capitalist, Cassidy. He moves in circles you cannot even imagine. Brittany thinks having you there with your little freelance paper-pushing gig would make her look bad. We need everything to be perfect. We cannot afford any embarrassments when a Wall Street billionaire is sitting at our dinner table." I took another slow sip of my espresso, letting the bitter liquid coat my tongue. The sheer audacity of her statement should have hurt, but it was just so typical of Catherine. As she continued to prattle on about how important this dinner was for Brittany's future, I walked across the imported hardwood floors of my $5 million home. A home my family knew absolutely nothing about. They still thought I was living in a cramped studio apartment, struggling to make ends meet by doing freelance bookkeeping. They had no idea I was the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Intelligence, a highly exclusive financial due diligence firm that the most powerful players on Wall Street relied on. Listening to her tear down my supposed failures, my mind drifted back to a painfully similar moment 15 years ago. I was standing in our suburban kitchen clutching my high school diploma. I had graduated at the top of my class and had been looking forward to the modest graduation party my parents had promised me for months. But Catherine had sat at the kitchen table casually filing her nails and told me the party was canceled. She had taken the deposit money from the caterer and used it to fund Brittany's cheerleading trip to Florida. She had looked at me with the exact same dismissive expression I could hear in her voice right now and said that Brittany's squad had a real chance at nationals, whereas a high school diploma was just a piece of paper everyone gets. I had cried that day, locking myself in the damp basement room they made me sleep in, while Brittany occupied the massive master suite upstairs. But I was not that helpless 18-year-old girl anymore. I was a woman who built an empire from the ground up while they threw all their resources at the golden child. I listened to my mother wrapping up her speech about why my exclusion was actually for the greater good of the family. She was waiting for me to argue. She wanted me to cry, to beg to defend my career so she could tear it down further. She fed on that drama, thriving on the power of making me feel small. Instead, I set my espresso cup down on the counter. The ceramic made a soft, clinking sound against the marble. I understood exactly what she was saying, and honestly, her timing could not have been more poetic. Understood, I said calmly, letting a cold professional detachment shield my voice. Have a great turkey. I ended the call before she could formulate a response. I did not throw my phone. I did not shed a single tear. I just walked over to my home office powered on my encrypted monitors and opened the comprehensive financial audit file labeled Green Eco. This was the brilliant tech startup Brittany claimed to have founded. It was also the exact same company Jamal had paid my firm $250,000 to investigate last week. The irony was so rich it almost felt scripted. I spent the rest of the day finalizing the report, detailing every fraudulent transaction, every fake employee, and every stolen dollar my sister had funneled out of Jamal's initial seed money. I went to sleep that night feeling a profound sense of peace. The Thanksgiving dread that usually haunted me was completely gone. I woke up the next morning feeling rested and refreshed, planning to enjoy a quiet Wednesday before the holiday. But my peace was abruptly shattered at exactly 7 in the morning. Heavy, aggressive pounding echoed through the foyer of my penthouse. Someone was hammering their fists against my custom oak double doors with violent force. The security intercom on the wall flared to life, transmitting the muffled, furious screams of my father, William. He was demanding that I open the door immediately, his voice hoarse with rage. I wrapped my silk robe around my shoulders, my heart rate steadying as I walked toward the entrance. The game had begun much earlier than I anticipated. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt, the sharp metallic click echoing through my quiet foyer. The moment the door swung open, a wave of pure chaotic hostility rushed into my apartment. My father William stood on the threshold, his face a dangerous shade of crimson, and his chest heaving with ragged breath. Right behind him was my mother Catherine, her knuckles stark white as she clutched her designer handbag like a weapon. Brittany was wedged tightly between them, her mascara smeared in perfect wet tracks down her cheeks as she let out sharp theatrical gasps for air. Looming over the three of them was Jamal. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal Italian suit, his expression was a mask of unreadable freezing gravity. Before I could even lift an eyebrow, William lunged forward into my space. "What did you do to your sister's bank accounts, you jealous brat?" He screamed, his voice vibrating so violently it bounced off the concrete walls of the corridor. "Did you hack her startup?" She woke up to a frozen corporate line, "And you are the only malicious tech nerd we know who would do something this disgusting out of pure, unadulterated spite." He raised his arm, attempting to shove his way past me to storm into my penthouse. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply shifted my weight, planting my forearm firmly against the heavy oak doorframe and physically blocking the entrance with my entire body. Looking at the veins bulging in his neck, my mind instantly flashed back to my 21st birthday. William had cornered me in the damp, cramped basement room they forced me to sleep in back then. He had slammed his hand onto my small wooden desk until my study lamp rattled, demanding I sign over the $5,000 I had painstakingly saved from double waitressing shifts. Brittany had run up a massive credit card debt buying designer clothes to impress her popular sorority friends, and William had looked at me with total contempt, telling me that a real family protects its own. He told me my savings were better spent bailing out my sister's silly mistakes than buying textbooks for a useless practical degree. I had collapsed into tears back then, entirely broken, and handed over the money. But today, standing in a luxury penthouse he could never dream of accessing, his explosive rage held absolutely zero power over me. I stood entirely unbothered, matching his furious glare with a cold, steady silence that only seemed to infuriate him more. Catherine stepped up next, her eyes flashing with a familiar toxic malice as she grabbed Brittany's arm. "Do not just stand there looking smug, Cassidy," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Your sister's entire future is on the line. Green Eco was supposed to secure a massive venture capital round this morning, and suddenly her primary operations account is flagged for international fraud. We know you did this. You have been seething with envy ever since I called to tell you that you were not welcome at our Thanksgiving table. You wanted to ruin her moment with Jamal because your own life is so pathetic and lonely that you cannot stand to see her succeed." "Look at her! Cassidy!" Brittany wailed precisely on cue, burying her face into Catherine's shoulder with practiced agony. "She did it on purpose, Mom. She knows how hard I worked on this sustainability platform. My primary investors are panic calling my cell phone right now. She hacked the server and ruined the banking interface just to make me look like a failure in front of Jamal. She has always hated me. I looked at the three of them completely detached from the storm they were trying to brew on my doorstep. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a frantic defense or try to explain the concept of financial compliance to people who clearly lacked a moral compass. Instead, I slowly crossed my arms, looking right past my parents' trembling shoulders to lock eyes with the one person who actually mattered in this room. Jamal had been standing entirely silent in the background. His sharp, analytical, faux-wall eyes had been darting between my father's red face, my mother's performative outrage, and my own absolute freezing calm. He was a man who made multi-million-dollar decisions based on micro-expressions, and right now he was analyzing the entire scene like a complex algorithm. Jamal took a slow, deliberate step forward, his polished dress shoes echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. The sheer commanding presence of the man made William choke back his next insult. Catherine froze mid-sob, her watery eyes widening as she prepared for her billionaire ticket to unleash his wrath on the daughter she had just disowned. Brittany stopped her fake crying entirely, a smug, triumphant smirk beginning to form at the corner of her lips as she waited for Jamal to crush me. But Jamal did not look at them. He pushed William aside with a firm, dismissive sweep of his arms, stepping directly into the bright light of my foyer. He stared at my face, his confident investor posture completely vanishing as the color visibly drained from his cheeks. He looked at my crossed arms, then at the sleek minimalist design of the multi-million-dollar penthouse extending behind me, and finally at the secure Aegis intelligence decryption key resting on the counter. Slowly, a look of profound, terrifying realization washed over his features. The powerful venture capitalist bowed his head respectfully, his voice dropping into a tone of utter reverence that made my family's jaws instantly drop to the floor. "Wait," he said, his voice barely a whisper through the shocked silence. "Are you CEO Cassidy, the head of Aegis Intelligence?" The silence that followed Jamal's question was so profound, it felt as though the air had been vacuumed directly out of the penthouse foyer. William stood completely frozen. His mouth hung slightly open, the angry crimson in his face rapidly draining to a sickly pale gray. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was waiting for the ground to rush up and meet him. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then my mother's deeply ingrained defense mechanisms kicked into overdrive. Catherine let out a high, breathy, nervous laugh that grated harshly against the acoustic perfection of my entryway. She stepped forward, reaching out with both hands, attempting to place a soothing maternal grip on Jamal's tailored sleeve. "Jamal, darling." "You must be incredibly confused," Catherine said. Her voice was dripping with that familiar condescending sweetness she always reserved for covering up my existence. "This is just Cassidy. She is absolutely not a CEO of anything. She does freelance bookkeeping, little tax forms and basic spreadsheets for local bakeries and struggling restaurants. She has this unfortunate habit of inflating her job title to sound much more important than she actually is. It is just a sad little coping mechanism because she struggles to hold down a real corporate job. You know how it is with people who lack ambition. They like to play pretend." I watched Jamal carefully. He did not immediately pull away from Catherine, but the absolute revulsion in his eyes was unmistakable. He was a man who traded in hard facts, verifiable data, and irrefutable proof. Hearing a mother deliberately degrade her own daughter with such casual, practiced cruelty seemed to genuinely shock him. He looked away from Catherine's desperate, smiling face and slowly surveyed my completely neutral expression. He took in my composed posture, the expensive silk of my robe, and the undeniable command I held over the space. With a slow, highly deliberate motion, Jamal brushed Catherine's hands off his jacket. He smoothed the fabric of his sleeve as if she had left a stain. His voice when he finally spoke was entirely stripped of any previous warmth or respect he might have held for his prospective mother-in-law. "I am not confused, Catherine," Jamal said, his tone striking the quiet foyer like a heavy gavel. "I do not make mistakes when it comes to the people I trust with my money. I personally wired $250,000 to Aegis Intelligence just last week as a preliminary retainer. I hired them to conduct a Tier 1 forensic due diligence sweep on my entire upcoming investment portfolio. And the woman standing right in front of you, the woman whose door your husband was just violently pounding on, is the founder and principal architect of that firm. She is widely considered the most dangerous, effective, and ruthless financial auditor on Wall Street. The words landed like physical blows. William took a literal step backward. His eyes darted frantically around the foyer, as if finally registering his surroundings. He looked at the imported marble floors, the custom modern art installations on the walls, the vaulted ceilings, and the sheer, undeniable wealth of the space he had tried to force his way into. This was not the cramped, struggling studio apartment they had pictured in their heads for the last decade. This was a fortress of extreme, unapologetic success. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Brittany. Her perfect tear-stained face was actively contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Seeing the absolute terror dawn in her eyes brought a specific crystal-clear memory rushing back to me. It was a family Thanksgiving dinner exactly 3 years ago. I had been sitting at the far end of the dining table, quietly checking my phone beneath the tablecloth, because I was in the middle of closing the massive corporate acquisition deal that would effectively put Aegis Intelligence on the map. Brittany had loudly scoffed, pointing her expensive crystal wine glass at me across the table. She had mocked my boring math job in front of our entire extended family, laughing about how I was wasting my 20s staring at depressing spreadsheets in a cubicle. She bragged about how she was out building a lifestyle brand and networking with real important influencers. William had loudly agreed with her, carving the turkey, while telling me I needed to learn how to present myself better if I ever wanted to move out of lower middle management. I had sat there completely silent, letting them mock my clothes and my career, knowing full well my boring math job had just netted me a seven-figure payout. I never defended myself because I knew that if they realized I had actual wealth, they would never stop trying to drain it from my accounts. Now, the absolute truth was stripping away their collective delusions in real time. Brittany, realizing that her entire carefully curated image was disintegrating right in front of the billionaire she intended to trap, went into full survival mode. She threw herself at Jamal, wrapping both her arms tightly around his bicep and digging her manicured nails into his suit jacket. "Jamal, she is lying!" Brittany shrieked. Her voice echoed shrilly off the high ceilings, filled with a desperate, grating panic. "I do not know how she tricked you, but she is a pathological liar. She has always been insanely jealous of me since we were little girls. She probably hacked your personal email to find out who you were hiring and set this whole elaborate thing up just to ruin my life. You have to believe me, baby. She is trying to destroy everything we have built together, because she is a miserable, lonely spinster who wants me to suffer just like she does." Jamal looked down at Brittany as if she had completely lost her mind. The rational, calculating side of his brain was clearly already processing the sheer absurdity of her accusation. He tried to pry her fingers off his arm, his expression hardening into a wall of stone. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to passionately defend my reputation or scream over her hysterical, baseless accusations. I simply turned my head slightly toward the long hallway behind me and gave a brief, subtle nod. My executive assistant, who had been standing quietly out of sight waiting for my signal, stepped forward smoothly. She bypassed my frozen family entirely and handed me a highly encrypted military-grade tablet. The screen was already glowing brightly, displaying a heavily redacted financial document with a glaring red header. "Speaking of ruining things," I said, my voice cutting through Brittany's frantic sobbing with the cold, clinical precision of a scalpel. "Jamal, it is incredibly convenient that you decided to stop by my home this morning. I was actually just sitting at my desk preparing to encrypt and email you the final expedited audit report you requested. The one specifically concerning the $10 million seed funding for Brittany's new sustainability startup Green Eco." I tapped the screen of my tablet twice, swiping upward. Instantly, the massive 85-inch screen mounted on the limestone wall of my living room flickered to life. The pristine high-definition display was suddenly flooded with cascading spreadsheets, highlighted bank transfers, and glaring red fraud indicators. The Aegis Intelligence watermark sat heavily in the corner of the screen, a seal of absolute terrifying finality. Brittany let out a noise that sounded like a wounded animal. She lunged forward, her hands outstretched as if she could physically wipe the digital ink off the television. William grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes darting frantically across the screen, trying to make sense of the financial jargon filling the room. Jamal did not blink. He stepped closer to the screen, his posture shifting from a betrayed partner to an apex predator analyzing bleeding prey. Green Eco was pitched to my firm as a revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform designed to optimize renewable energy supply chains, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the stunned silence. A beautiful concept, Jamal. Truly. The only problem is that the entire enterprise is an elaborate hollow fiction. I swiped my screen again. A new window expanded on the television. Let us start with the core technology. I continued pacing slowly behind my marble island. Brittany claimed to have developed proprietary software utilizing machine learning. Our forensic digital team swept the source code repository provided in her prospectus. There is no code. The repository contains exactly 3 gigabytes of open-source placeholder files downloaded from a public forum. The server farm listed on the tax filings does not exist. The IP addresses point to a rented janitorial closet in a strip mall outside of Newark. Catherine sputtered, stepping in front of Brittany like a shield. You do not know what you are talking about, Cassidy. Brittany is an innovator. She has a whole team of brilliant engineers working around the clock. I smiled tightly and tapped another folder. The screen shifted to display 12 LinkedIn profiles, all listing themselves as senior developers at GreenEco. 0 physical employees. I stated, bringing up the back-end data for the profiles. My team ran a basic reverse image search. Every single headshot on the company roster was generated by artificial intelligence. You created fake profiles, gave them fake credentials, and set up automated email responders to trick Jamal's initial vetting team. Jamal turned his head slowly to look at Brittany. The muscle in his jaw feathered. He did not yell. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Is this true, Brittany? Are you running a shell company? Brittany was hyperventilating, shaking her head so violently her blonde hair whipped across her face. Jamal, no, you have to listen to me. It is a startup. We are in the stealth phase. She does not understand tech culture. We are pivoting our deliverables. She was throwing out empty corporate buzzwords, hoping something would stick. It was pathetic, and watching her scramble brought a razor-sharp memory crashing to the forefront of my mind. It was the spring of my senior year of college. I had spent 6 agonizing months researching and writing an 80-page honors thesis on global market analytics. It was my ticket to an elite fellowship. 3 days before the deadline, I found my laptop missing. I caught Brittany in the campus library printing my entire thesis. She had simply deleted my name on the title page and typed her own, intending to submit it for her senior seminar because she was failing the class. When I dragged her home and showed our parents the proof, Catherine had slapped me across the cheek. She had told me that family shares everything and that I was a selfish, ungrateful sister for trying to hoard my intelligence. I had to rewrite my entire project from scratch in 48 hours, while Brittany secured a passing grade on my stolen labor. You have always preferred stealing over sweating, Brittany, I said, allowing just a fraction of my disdain to bleed into my voice. Just like my college thesis, you did not even bother to try and hide your theft this time. I tapped the screen once more, splitting the display down the middle. On the left side was the brilliant, supposedly groundbreaking pitch deck Brittany had used to secure Jamal's investment. On the right side was a pitch deck from a failed defunct tech company from 2018 called Eco Future. It is a direct copy and paste job, Jamal, I noted, gesturing to the undeniable proof on the screen. She stole a dead company's business model, slapped a green leaf logo on it, and handed it to you wrapped in a pretty bow. Jamal closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the billionaire venture capitalist was fully present, and he was out for blood. 4 months ago, Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave. I injected $2 million of initial seed capital into the Green Eco operational account. My team bypassed standard secondary vetting because I personally vouched for you, Brittany. Because I trusted you. If there is no software, no servers, and no employees, where is my money? Brittany stumbled backward, her back hitting the entryway wall. She looked at William and Catherine, her eyes wide with unmasked terror. Daddy, make her stop, she whimpered, her voice reverting to that of a helpless child. William puffed out his chest, stepping aggressively toward the marble island. Listen to me, Jamal, he boomed, attempting to regain control of the room. Startups burn cash quickly. Everyone knows that. There is overhead marketing office space. It takes money to make money. My daughter is a visionary. I did not even look at my father. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal. Would you like to see the visionary overhead? Jamal. Jamal gave a single rigid nod. Show me. I swiped my finger across the tablet. The screen cleared, replacing the fake employee profiles with certified time-stamped bank statements from the Green Eco operational account. I watched Jamal's eyes scan the lines of data, tracking his growing horror as I read the line items out loud for the room to hear. $300,000 on first-class Emirates flights to Dubai and Paris. I listed, watching Catherine shrink backward as she recognized the destinations. $150,000 spent at Hermes and Chanel boutiques across Manhattan. An $80,000 upfront lease payment for a custom Mercedes G-Wagon. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure every single person in the room felt the full weight of the impending destruction. But the most fascinating recurring expense, I continued, my voice echoing off the glass windows, is a monthly retainer of $40,000. This money was wired directly from the Green Eco corporate account to a personal offshore account registered under the name of a 22-year-old male fitness influencer. Jamal turned slowly to face Brittany. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. She had not just stolen his money to buy designer bags. She had used his $2 million investment to financially sponsor a young Instagram model behind his back. The silence in the penthouse was no longer just heavy. It was suffocating, pressing down on the room with the crushing weight of absolute ruin. Jamal stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the digital bank statement projected across my 85-inch screen. The words, $40,000 monthly retainer, next to the name of a 22-year-old male fitness model, seemed to burn themselves into his retinas. He was not looking at his girlfriend anymore. He was looking at a terrible, highly expensive liability. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak emerged. She shrank back against the wall, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished hardwood. She had run out of lies, run out of tears, and run out of corporate buzzwords to hide behind. But Catherine had not. My mother possessed a truly terrifying inability to accept defeat. Where a normal person would see undeniable financial fraud, Catherine saw a minor public relations issue that simply required the correct spin. She stepped forcefully in front of Brittany, physically shielding her golden child from Jamal's freezing glare. She smoothed the front of her expensive blouse, lifted her chin, and arranged her face into an expression of indignant, righteous authority. "Jamal, you are taking this entirely out of context," Catherine announced, her voice ringing out with a sharp, scolding authority. "You are looking at raw numbers without understanding the modern business landscape. Those trips to Dubai and Paris were not vacations. They were strictly networking and diplomatic expenses. Brittany is building a global sustainability brand. You cannot expect her to secure international partnerships by sitting in a cheap office in Newark. She has to meet with global leaders, attend exclusive summits, and project an image of absolute success. You have to spend money to build an empire." She gestured flippantly toward the screen, waving away the glaring evidence of theft, as if it were a simple accounting error. And as for the brand ambassador, Catherine continued, her tone dripping with exasperation. "That is simply how influencer marketing works today. Brittany hired him to promote Green Eco to a younger demographic. It is an investment in public relations. You are a venture capitalist, Jamal. You of all people should understand that aggressive marketing requires aggressive funding. Cassidy is just spinning these standard operational costs to look malicious. because she does not understand how high-level business actually functions. Watching my mother confidently defend the indefensible sent a cold wave of nostalgia washing over me. I had seen this exact performance before. I was 16 years old, standing in the sterile fluorescent-lit hallway of our high school administrative building. Brittany had been caught red-handed during midterms. The proctor had found the stolen answer key to the state standardized math exam taped directly to the inside of her desk. Academic suspension was guaranteed, and the principal was actively preparing the paperwork for her expulsion. But Catherine had not panicked. She had marched into Principal Evans' office, wearing her best pearls, clutching her custom leather checkbook like a shield. I had listened through the thin wooden door as she completely bypassed any apology. She did not yell or plead. Instead, she masterfully framed a blatant illegal bribe as a philanthropic community-minded donation. She wrote a check for $15,000 to fund the new athletic bleachers, smoothly suggesting that a girl of Brittany's social caliber should not have her entire bright future derailed by a simple, undocumented misunderstanding. The suspension vanished from the records the very next day. Catherine had spent decades teaching my sister that consequences were merely an illusion, a minor inconvenience that could always be bought, erased, or explained away with the right vocabulary and a heavy dose of entitlement. But Jamal was not a suburban high school principal. He was a man who moved markets. You could not manipulate a Wall Street titan who could buy your entire bloodline with the interest generated from his checking account. I watched the final remnants of the betrayed boyfriend vanish from Jamal's face. The emotional shock evaporated instantly, replaced by the ruthless, calculating venture capital shark who had ruthlessly dismantled multinational corporations. His posture straightened, his shoulders squaring, as he looked down at my mother with an expression of pure, predatory, absolute zero. Diplomatic expenses. Jamal repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, carrying a lethal edge that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You are looking at $250,000 in luxury apparel, an international first-class travel billed to a seed-stage startup that possesses absolutely zero proprietary software, and you are calling it diplomatic expenses. Catherine swallowed hard, her confident smile faltering for the first time, but she managed a stiff nod. Yes, exactly. It is all perfectly justifiable overhead. Jamal stepped toward her, towering over my mother. His presence was overwhelmingly dominant. Let me explain something to you about the law, Catherine Jamal said, his words falling like stones. Venture capital seed funds are heavily regulated, legally protected assets. They are dispersed under strict contractual guidelines for the sole purpose of product development and legitimate operational scaling. Using investor capital to fund personal luxury vacations and sponsor a 22-year-old male companion is not a diplomatic expense. It is a textbook violation of federal law. It is corporate embezzlement. It is wire fraud. Williams suddenly stepped forward, sweating profusely, his hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. Now hold on, Jamal. Let us not use words like fraud. We are all family here. We can figure this out internally. I will personally write you a check to cover the discrepancies. We can balance the ledgers today. Just name the price. Jamal did not even look at my father. His eyes remained locked on the massive television screen. He walked directly up to the limestone wall, his gaze tracking the cascading lines of financial data. The shark was actively hunting now, searching for the absolute bottom of the deception. Cassidy Jamal commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Pull up the initial incorporation documents. Bring up the master seed funding contract I signed 4 months ago. I want to see the underlying legal disclosures. I did not say a word. I simply tapped my tablet, authorizing the decryption of the primary legal files. The screen shifted instantly. The bank statements vanished, replaced by the heavily legalized 80-page venture capital contract that had officially transferred Jamal's $2 million into Brittany's fraudulent company. Jamal leaned in, his eyes darting across the digital pages. He read through the executive summaries, the board member listings, and the liability clauses. He reached the final page, staring at the digital signatures, authenticating the massive transfer of wealth. He stopped. He froze entirely, his eyes locking onto a specific line near the bottom of the screen. The silence in the room stretched until it felt as though the glass windows might shatter from the pressure. Jamal turned his head slowly. The look on his face was no longer just anger. It was a dark, devastating promise of total annihilation. He looked directly at my father. "Wait," Jamal said, his voice dropping so dangerously low it felt like a physical threat. "William, why is your signature on the guarantor line of this fraudulent seed funding contract?" The silence that followed Jamal's question was heavier than concrete. William stared at the digital document glowing on the massive screen, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had spent his entire life dominating boardrooms and intimidating bank tellers with his booming voice. But right now, trapped under the freezing scrutiny of a Wall Street billionaire, he looked incredibly small. Jamal did not break eye contact. "I asked you a direct question," William Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of any previous warmth. "Why is your signature guaranteeing a $2 million fraudulent investment?" William straightened his spine visibly, forcing himself to revert to the only defense mechanism he knew. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon the patriarchal authority he used to control Catherine and me for decades. He let out a loud, booming scoff, waving his hand dismissively at the screen, as if the highly illegal contract was nothing more than a minor clerical error. "I was simply helping my daughter's business," Jamal William boomed, deliberately projecting his voice from his diaphragm to fill the penthouse. "It is what a real father does. I believed in Brittany's vision, and I co-signed the initial paperwork to help her establish a baseline of corporate credit. It is a completely standard practice in early-stage venture capital. I am a guarantor. That is all. You are making a mountain out of a molehill because my estranged daughter is projecting her own financial insecurities onto a perfectly normal family business arrangement." I did not react to his insult. I simply looked down at my tablet and tapped the screen twice. The display on the television shifted instantly, replacing the seed funding contract with a series of highly classified, heavily redacted property deeds and bank foreclosure notices. "You are not just a guarantor, William," I said, keeping my voice dead level. "You are an active participant in an illegal financial cover-up." William froze, the manufactured bravado draining from his face as he recognized the seal of the Connecticut State Property Registry glowing brightly on the wall. I swiped my finger across the tablet, zooming in on a specific paragraph. "You did not just co-sign a loan to help her establish credit." I continued, addressing Jamal directly. "When Brittany burned through the first $1 million buying designer clothes and funding her influencer boyfriend, the startup account went into a massive deficit. To hide the missing capital from your initial quarterly audit, William illegally leveraged our family's primary Connecticut estate. He took out a massive unregulated shadow mortgage using falsified asset declarations, and he funneled that money directly into Green Eco to make it look like the company was still solvent." Catherine let out a sharp, genuine gasp. She turned to William, her face a mask of absolute horror. "William, what is she talking about?" Catherine demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "You told me you were taking out a small business line of credit. You put a shadow mortgage on the house, our house." William ignored her, his eyes glaring daggers at me. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He hated being exposed, but more than anything, he hated being exposed by me. "You are pathetic," William spat, taking a threatening step toward my kitchen island. "You have spent your entire life trying to tear this family apart. You have always been bitter. You have always been jealous of your sister's opportunities. We provided everything for you, and this is how you repay us." Listening to him claim he provided everything for me triggered a memory so painful it briefly stole the breath from my lungs. I was 25 years old, lying in a sterile hospital bed with an IV dripping into my arm. My appendix had ruptured unexpectedly, requiring emergency surgery. I was a junior analyst at the time, barely making rent, and my entry-level health insurance left me with a staggering $20,000 medical bill. I had called William from my hospital room, terrified and in agonizing pain, begging him for a temporary loan just to keep the debt collectors away. He had coldly refused. He told me that money was incredibly tight right now and that bailing me out would ruin the family's financial planning. He said an adult needs to learn how to handle their own emergencies. I had cried myself to sleep that night, terrified of bankruptcy. Exactly 1 week later, Catherine posted a glowing photo on social media. William had surprised Brittany with a brand new, fully loaded Range Rover just to celebrate her passing a basic yoga certification course. He had spent $90,000 in cash on a luxury vehicle for his golden child while leaving me to drown in medical debt. I looked at the man who had abandoned me in that hospital bed. There was no sadness left in me, only a cold surgical precision. "You provided nothing for me," I said quietly. "You used your wealth as a weapon to control us, rewarding Brittany for her failures while punishing me for my independence. And now, your blind favoritism has finally crossed the line into federal fraud." William slammed his fist down onto the marble countertop. The loud crack echoed through the room, but neither Jamal nor I flinched. "You ungrateful little brat," William roared, his face purple with rage. "I am done with you. Do you hear me? You are completely cut off. I will call my lawyers the second I leave this building. You are out of the will. You will never see a single dime of the family wealth. You will never set foot on the Connecticut estate ever again. You are dead to me." I stared at him for a long, silent moment. I let his threats hang in the air, letting him believe just for a second that he still held some fraction of power over my life. Then a dark, genuine laugh escaped my lips. It was a cold sound, completely devoid of humor. I tapped the tablet one final time. The screen on the wall shifted, bringing up a certified deed of ownership bearing the Aegis Intelligence corporate seal. "You cannot evict me from the Connecticut estate, William," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute calm. "Because when you illegally mortgaged that house to cover Brittany's fraud, you defaulted on the shadow payments. The private lender put the debt up for blind auction 3 days ago." William stopped breathing. The color completely vanished from his face as he stared at the document on the screen. I smiled, leaning forward against the marble island. "Last night my proxy firm bought that defaulted debt," I whispered, ensuring every single word landed like a physical strike. "You do not own the family estate anymore, William. I do." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. William stared at the digital deed projected on the wall, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The booming patriarch who had dominated every room he ever entered was suddenly gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling shell of a man. He reached out a hand to steady himself against the marble counter, his knuckles turning white as the reality of his total financial ruin set in. Catherine, however, did not deflate. She ignited. The realization that her ultimate status symbol, the sprawling Connecticut estate she used to host her elite social circle, now belonged to the daughter she despised, pushed her entirely over the edge. A high-pitched, guttural sound tore from my mother's throat. It was not a scream of fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She spun around, her manicured hand snatching a heavy baccarat crystal vase off the entryway console table. With a violent, jerky motion, she hurled it directly at the limestone wall. The crystal shattered on impact, a deafening crash that sent jagged shards of glass exploding across the hardwood floor. Water and white orchids splattered across the polished wood, creating a massive, ugly puddle at her designer feet. "You are a monster!" Catherine shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of hatred. Her voice was so loud it cracked, echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. "You are a vindictive, evil monster. You planned this. You set a trap for your own sister, and now you are tearing this family apart just to punish us." I did not flinch when the vase shattered. I simply looked at the broken crystal and crushed orchids on the floor. It was a fitting visual for what was happening to their carefully constructed lies. Tearing the family apart, I repeated, keeping my voice completely level, a stark contrast to her hysterical screaming. "There is no family here, Catherine. There is only a financial parasite and its hosts." "How dare you take our home?" she sobbed. Stepping forward, her fists clenched so tightly her nails must have been biting into her palms. "That house is our legacy. It is where we raised you. It is your childhood home." Calling the Connecticut estate my childhood home was the most profound insult she could have thrown at me. The physical structure of that house was the ultimate monument to my oppression. I remembered exactly how I was raised within those walls. While William and Catherine threw lavish summer parties on the sweeping back lawn, I was effectively hidden away like a shameful secret. When I turned 12, my parents had forced me to move out of my upstairs bedroom so Brittany could have a dedicated dressing room for her pageant gowns. They relocated me to the unfinished basement. For 6 long years, I lived in a damp, windowless concrete box that smelled perpetually of mildew and old laundry. I spent freezing New England winters huddled under 3 thin blankets, listening to the mice scurry behind the drywall, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Directly above me, Brittany occupied the newly renovated master suite. She had a custom walk-in closet, a heated bathroom floor, and a private balcony overlooking the rose garden. The spatial division of that house was a daily physical reminder of my exact worth in their eyes. I was the concrete foundation they walked all over, and Brittany was the crown jewel they put on display. That house was never my home, I stated, stepping around the marble island to face her directly. It was a holding cell. And now it is an asset in my corporate portfolio. I have already instructed my legal team to draft the eviction notices. You have exactly 30 days to pack up Brittany's pageant gowns and vacate the premises before I have the local sheriff change the locks. William let out a weak, strangled gasp, grabbing his chest as if the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. Catherine looked as though she had been physically struck. She stumbled backward, her heels crunching loudly on the broken glass. She looked at Jamal, desperately hoping the billionaire venture capitalist would somehow intervene and stop this domestic execution. "Jamal, you cannot let her do this," Catherine pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate shaking whine. "She is out of her mind. She is stealing our property over a simple business misunderstanding. You have to stop her. You have the power to make this right." Jamal did not move a single inch. His tailored suit was immaculate, his posture perfectly rigid. He looked at my mother with a level of disgust usually reserved for toxic waste. "I am not involved in your real estate disputes," Catherine, Jamal said, his tone icy and precise, cutting through her hysteria. "My only concern is the $2 million your daughter embezzled from my firm and the federal wire fraud your husband just committed to cover it up. Cassidy is not stealing your house. She is executing a perfectly legal acquisition of a defaulted asset. You lost your home the second you decided to commit a felony." Brittany was openly sobbing now, sliding slowly down the wall until she sat on the floor, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently. The reality of prison, absolute poverty, and massive public humiliation was finally crushing her artificial reality. Catherine was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place, clinging to her damp forehead. The panic in her eyes shifted into a cornered, frantic desperation. She realized that intimidation had failed, that patriarchal authority had failed, and that her lifelong weapon of emotional manipulation was entirely useless against me now. I had backed her into an inescapable corner, stripping away her wealth, her elite status, and her golden child's future in one single evening. Driven to the absolute brink, my mother lost whatever remaining filter she possessed. Her desperation mutated into a venomous, hysterical defense mechanism. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her eyes wide and manic. "You forced us to do this!" Catherine shrieked, her voice tearing through the penthouse like a siren. "We had to use the house. We had to leverage the estate to save Brittany because we had no other choice." I stared at her, narrowing my eyes. "What do you mean you had no other choice?" Catherine took a ragged breath, her face contorting with a toxic mixture of shame and defiant malice. "We had no other cash flow," she screamed, her words tumbling out in a frantic, unhinged confession. "We could not take out a standard bank loan to cover Brittany's startup losses. We could not pass a basic credit check. We could not go to a legitimate bank." "Why not William?" I demanded, shifting my freezing gaze to my father. He was suddenly shaking his head violently, his hands waving in the air, silently begging his wife to stop talking and seal her mouth shut. But Catherine did not stop. She shrieked the terrible, devastating truth at the top of her lungs, unleashing the final, darkest secret they had kept buried for years. We had to use the house because we maxed out the credit cards we opened in your name. The echo of Catherine's scream faded, leaving behind a vacuum of absolute suffocating silence. William looked as though he was going to vomit. He clamped his hands over his face, staggering backward as the reality of his wife's hysterical outburst set in. She had just confessed to a severe federal crime in front of a billionaire investor and the daughter they had systematically defrauded. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I just looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling the last remaining microscopic thread of biological attachment snap and dissolve into dust. I was 22 years old, living in a roach-infested apartment in Queens, working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst. My phone rang incessantly from dawn until midnight, flooded with aggressive, threatening calls from collection agencies, demanding payments for massive retail accounts I had never opened. I lived on plain pasta and tap water for 8 brutal months. I walked 3 miles to work in the freezing snow because my bank account was so overdrawn I could not afford a basic subway pass. I thought my identity had been compromised by a random overseas hacker. I thought it was a terrible, unexplainable glitch in the credit bureaus. When I went home to the Connecticut estate for Thanksgiving that year, shivering in a cheap, threadbare coat William had carved, the roasted turkey looked at my hollow, exhausted cheekbones and given a pompous toast about the importance of pulling oneself up by the bootstraps. Catherine had tutted at my scuffed shoes, telling me I needed to try harder to present a successful image to the world. They sat at the head of a mahogany table, eating a lavish feast paid for with my stolen identity, watching me actively starve to death, and they did not lose a single second of sleep over it. Now standing in my own penthouse looking at their terrified faces, I felt nothing but a cold surgical precision. "You think this is about a few maxed-out credit cards, Catherine?" I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a scalpel. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on my tablet. The Connecticut property deed vanished from the massive wall display. In its place, a stark, highly encrypted digital portal materialized. The heavy, imposing seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation sat in the top left corner right next to a glaring red file labeled Active Open Investigation. William made a sound like a dying animal. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen island, his knuckles turning pure white as his legs threatened to give out completely. Catherine stopped hyperventilating, staring at the government seal with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "Let us look at the real funding behind Green Eco," I announced, projecting the core legal documents onto the screen for Jamal to see. 4 years ago, you did not just open a few retail credit cards in my name. You used my social security number, my forged signature, and my spotless legal history to secure a $500,000 small business loan from a Tier 1 bank. You routed that money through 3 different shell companies in Delaware to mask the origin and then dumped it directly into Brittany's operational account so she could lease her custom Mercedes and fly first class to Dubai. I swiped my finger, bringing up the exact time-stamped routing numbers and the forged signature pages alongside the official FBI tracking logs. "You did not just co-sign a loan for your golden child," William Buster stated, locking eyes with my trembling father. "You committed federal identity theft. You committed wire fraud. You stole $500,000 using my name, and you let me suffer in absolute poverty to cover your tracks." Jamal turned away from the television screen. The absolute disgust on his face was palpable. He looked at my parents as if they were a toxic substance he had accidentally stepped in. He had spent his entire life swimming with ruthless apex predators in the venture capital world, but stealing a starving child's identity to fund a fraudulent hollow lifestyle for an influencer was a level of suburban depravity that thoroughly repulsed him. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his phone. His movements were calm, precise, and entirely devoid of hesitation. "I am calling my legal team." Jamal stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising rumble that promised total devastation. "We are freezing every single asset tied to your names. And then I am placing a call directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. You are not just facing bankruptcy, William. You are facing federal prison." Brittany watched Jamal dialing the numbers on his screen. She saw the billionaire lifestyle, the private jets, the designer bags, and her entire false reality evaporating into thin air. The sheer panic finally overrode her shock. She lunged forward, her knees slamming painfully onto the hardwood floor right at Jamal's feet. She threw her arms out, grabbing the perfectly pressed fabric of his trousers, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Jamal, wait!" Brittany screamed, her voice tearing from her throat in a desperate, ragged shriek. "You cannot leave. You cannot do this to me. I am pregnant with your baby." Jamal looked down at Brittany. She was clinging to the razor-sharp crease of his suit trousers, her knuckles white, her face buried in the wool fabric. The silence in the penthouse stretched into a high-pitched ringing. She had played the ultimate trump card, the billionaire heir, the legacy. For a fraction of a second, William let out a breath. The color rushed back into my father's face. He actually smiled. It was a small, sickening twitch of the lips, but it was there. He thought he was saved. He thought the magic word had just erased the wire fraud, the identity theft, and the stolen Connecticut estate. Catherine did not just smile. She weaponized the moment with the speed of a seasoned combat veteran. She practically leaped across the broken crystal on the floor, shoving her way past the island to stand directly over Brittany. She placed a protective, dramatic hand on her daughter's trembling shoulder and turned her blazing eyes on Jamal. "Did you hear her, Jamal?" Catherine demanded, her voice rising to a shrill, commanding pitch. "She is carrying your child, your legacy. You cannot stand there and threaten us with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You cannot send the mother of your unborn baby to a federal penitentiary, and you certainly cannot send this child's grandfather to a prison cell. This changes everything. We are family now. You have a duty to protect your bloodline, not destroy it over a simple misunderstanding about startup capital." Catherine spun around, pointing that same manicured finger directly at my chest. "And you!" Catherine shrieked, her face twisting with righteous, venomous fury. "You are going to cancel that foreclosure immediately. You are going to sign that Connecticut property back over to us today. You would actually throw your pregnant sister out onto the street. You would evict an unborn child just to satisfy your pathetic, jealous vendetta. You are going to fix this, Cassidy. You are going to drop the identity theft nonsense, and you are going to help your sister prepare for motherhood. That is what a real sister does." I stared at Brittany, who was still sobbing into Jamal's pant leg, her shoulders heaving with perfectly timed theatrical gasps. Watching her use a medical crisis to completely derail a moment of accountability felt incredibly familiar. It was a page torn directly from her favorite playbook. I was 22 years old, sitting in the front row of my university auditorium, wearing my heavy black cap and gown. I was the valedictorian of my graduating class, waiting to deliver the speech I had practiced for 3 straight months. My parents were sitting in the middle bleachers. I had begged them to come. Just as the dean called my name to approach the podium, a piercing scream echoed through the packed auditorium. It was Brittany. She had collapsed in the bleachers, clutching her chest, gasping for air, thrashing wildly against the wooden benches. She screamed that her heart was stopping, that she was dying. The entire ceremony came to a grinding halt. Paramedics rushed the stands. William and Catherine hovered over her, screaming at the crowd to make way. They rode with her in the ambulance to the emergency room, leaving me standing completely alone on the stage. I delivered my valedictorian speech to 2 empty chairs. 4 hours later, the emergency room doctor discharged Brittany with a clean bill of health. He quietly noted she had experienced a minor hyperventilation episode brought on by stress. The only stress Brittany had been under was the unbearable agony of watching someone else be the center of attention for 5 consecutive minutes. She had faked a massive medical emergency to steal my graduation, and now cornered by a federal fraud investigation, she was claiming a miraculous pregnancy to steal Jamal's mercy. Jamal, Williams said, stepping forward, his chest puffed out again, his voice dropping into a conciliatory patriarchal tone. "A child is a blessing. It puts everything into perspective. We can settle the financial ledgers quietly. We can handle the corporate restructuring in-house. We will set up a trust for the baby. We are all going to be one big, powerful family." Jamal did not move. He did not reach down to comfort the woman sobbing at his feet. He did not look at Catherine, and he certainly did not look at William. He stood as rigid as a marble statue. Slowly, deliberately, Jamal reached down and peeled Brittany's hands off his trousers. He stepped backward, distancing himself from her grasping fingers. Brittany looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks, her expression morphing from practiced sorrow into genuine, unadulterated panic. She expected him to melt. She expected the billionaire to drop to his knees and swear to protect his heir. Jamal smoothed the fabric of his suit jacket. His face was a mask of pure, terrifying indifference. He did not look like a man who had just been told he was going to be a father. He looked like an apex predator evaluating a highly contaminated asset. He bypassed Catherine entirely. He ignored William completely. He turned his head and locked his dark, calculating eyes directly onto mine. The temperature in the room plummeted. He was no longer the betrayed boyfriend. He was strictly the venture capitalist addressing the forensic auditor he had hired to clean up a mess. Cassidy Jamal said, his voice flat, professional, and dead calm. "Did your due diligence sweep include her private medical records?" "I did," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the penthouse. I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the edge of the counter and withdrew a thick, sealed black folder. I placed my hand flat on top of it and slid it across the cool marble of the kitchen island. It came to a stop exactly halfway between Jamal and my sister. Brittany's tear-streaked face drained of all color. The artificial maternal glow she had desperately tried to project evaporated in an instant, replaced by the sheer primal terror of a cornered animal. She knew exactly what was inside that folder. The realization hit her so hard her knees buckled. She let out a guttural, panicked wail, the illusion of the delicate, distressed mother to be shattered entirely. She scrambled up from the floor, her manicured claws scraping against the hardwood, and threw her entire body weight across the marble island. She lunged wildly, her arm outstretched, desperate to snatch the cardboard and shred the contents into confetti before Jamal could see them. Jamal did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. With the effortless, terrifying grace of a man who maintained absolute control over his environment, he shot his arm out and intercepted her. He clamped his large hand around her wrist mid-air, stopping her momentum dead. His grip was an iron vice. He pushed her back, forcing her to stumble away from the counter, her expensive heels skidding dangerously across the broken crystal shards of the vase Catherine had shattered earlier. "Do not touch my property," Jamal warned, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that commanded total obedience. With his free hand, Jamal pulled the black folder out of her reach and placed it squarely in front of him. "You cannot look at that!" Brittany screamed, hyperventilating as she clutched her bruised wrist against her chest. "Jamal, she is forging documents. Cassidy is insane. She is violating my privacy to frame me because she is jealous. She has always been jealous of me." I stepped around the kitchen island, closing the distance between myself and my family. When you spend your early 20s dodging aggressive collection agencies, skipping meals to pay off fraudulent debts that your own parents pinned on you, you develop a very specific survival skill, I explained, keeping my tone surgical and precise. You learn to stop listening to the lies people tell, and you start looking exclusively at the data. I looked at my father, who was sweating profusely, his hands trembling at his sides. "The math does not care about your social standing, William." I turned my gaze to my mother, who was staring at the black folder as if it were an explosive device. "The math does not care about your pristine country club reputation, Catherine. And the math certainly does not care about your miraculous, convenient pregnancy, Brittany." "My firm specializes in total asset protection." I continued addressing Jamal, but ensuring my voice carried to every corner of the room. "When a client of Jamal's caliber hires us to audit a corporate restructuring, my mandate is to ensure his capital is completely insulated from risk. That means leaving absolutely zero blind spots. We do not just look at profit and loss statements. We audit the corporate accounts, the personal accounts, the hidden trusts, and the shell companies. We scour every single digital footprint." Catherine stepped forward, trying to shield Brittany, her face twisted with a mixture of fear and venom. "You have no right to dig into her personal medical history," Catherine hissed. "This is illegal. You are a monster." "I track the money, Catherine. The money never lies." I shot back, shutting her down instantly. When I audited Green Eco, I noticed Brittany was bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars in supposed consulting fees to an unlisted LLC operating out of upstate New York. It took my forensic accounting team exactly 12 hours to pierce the corporate veil on that LLC. It was not a consulting firm. It was a private, high-security concierge medical billing service. Brittany collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor again, pulling her knees to her chest. She was rocking back and forth, her hands clamped over her ears, refusing to listen to the reality of her exposure. You were not just embezzling Jamal's investment capital to buy designer bags and lease luxury cars, Brittany, I stated, staring down at her. You were funneling massive amounts of stolen corporate funds directly into a highly discreet medical clinic. William and Catherine taught me early on that family will lie to your face to protect their image. So I dug deeper. I executed a full sweep of the invoices tied to those payments. Every single receipt is in that folder. Jamal broke the thick wax seal on the black folder. His face was unreadable, a terrifyingly blank canvas, as he flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. He pulled out a thick stack of papers, all printed on crisp, watermarked letterhead. The silence in the penthouse returned heavier and more suffocating than before. The only sound was the crisp rustle of paper as Jamal turned the pages, his dark, calculating eyes scanning the itemized lists of charges. He read through the dates, the billing codes, and the medical procedures Brittany had desperately tried to bury. William closed his eyes, accepting his utter defeat. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the heat of the room, watching her ultimate safety net completely unravel. Jamal stopped on the third page. He stared at a specific invoice for a long, agonizing moment. He slowly placed the document flat on the marble counter, smoothing out the edges with the palm of his hand. He looked down at Brittany. The contempt in his eyes was absolute, freezing the very air in the room. He looked at her not as a partner, not as a lover, but as a parasite he was about to permanently eradicate from his life. An invoice, Jamal stated, his voice devoid of a single ounce of emotion. An itemized prepaid invoice for premium donor material from the Northeast IVF and Fertility Clinic. He tilted his head, his gaze boring into Brittany's terrified, wide eyes. Funny, I had a vasectomy 5 years ago. Brittany stopped breathing. The color drained from her face so rapidly she looked like a wax mannequin left out in the sun. She remained kneeling on the hardwood floor, staring up at Jamal's impassive, chiseled face. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, choking sound emerged from her throat. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. Catherine stood frozen behind her, her hand hovering in the air. The fierce maternal indignation that had fueled her attack just seconds prior vanished, replaced by an absolute suffocating dread. Jamal did not blink. He looked down at the woman who had just claimed to be carrying his legacy, his face a mask of freezing contempt. He tossed the medical invoice onto the counter, the paper gliding silently across the marble. "Who is the father?" Jamal asked. His voice was not raised, but the quiet, deadly authority in his tone made the floorboards seem to vibrate. Brittany scrambled backward, her expensive heels slipping on the crushed orchid petals. She held her hands up defensively, tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving. "Jamal, please!" she sobbed, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading pitch. "You do not understand. I was so lonely. You were always flying to Tokyo and London for your board meetings. I was trapped in that huge penthouse all by myself. I just needed emotional connection. I was neglected." It was the exact same script she had used 3 years ago. I watched her perfectly rehearsed tears flow, feeling a profound sense of déjà vu. When her previous engagement to a junior state senator imploded a month before the wedding, she had used the exact same defense. She had slept with her private tennis instructor, got caught, and instantly sobbed to our parents that her fiancé was emotionally starving her. William had not disciplined her. Instead, he had written a $50,000 check to quietly buy the tennis instructor's silence and pay the cancellation fees for the country club venue. Catherine had spent weeks comforting her golden child, entirely blaming the senator for working too many late nights. They had always shielded her from the consequences of her own reckless infidelity, enabling her toxic behavior because maintaining the illusion of perfection was all that mattered. But Jamal was not a naive politician trying to protect a public image, and I was no longer the silent scapegoat forced to watch them cover their tracks. I reached out and tapped a single command on my tablet. The massive digital display on the wall instantly shifted from the glowing FBI seal. A new window expanded across the limestone surface, projecting a high-resolution mirror of Brittany's private iCloud backups. I had subpoenaed her entire digital footprint during the forensic accounting sweep. "His name is Chase," I announced, my voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "He is 24 years old. He is a fitness influencer based out of Miami, and according to the corporate ledgers you tried to bury, he has been on the payroll of your fraudulent consulting firm for the past 11 months. Brittany shrieked, scrambling to her feet and lunging toward the wall as if she could physically rip the digital projection from the stone. The screen illuminated with a rapid, undeniable sequence of explicit text messages and time-stamped photographs. I let the entire room read the unredacted truth. The display scrolled through months of communications between my sister and the influencer. There were messages of Brittany complaining about Jamal being out of town, followed immediately by flight confirmations booking Chase first-class tickets to New York. There were digital receipts showing Brittany paying the rent on his luxury Miami condo. There were photos of a solid gold Rolex she had purchased for his birthday, all funded directly by the capital she had embezzled from Jamal's venture firm. Then the final, most damning exchange materialized on the wall in giant, glowing text. It was dated just 2 weeks prior, right after her visit to the fertility clinic. "Do not worry about the clinic bill," Brittany's text read, the blue bubble massive on the display. "The venture capitalist idiot thinks the baby is his. He is so busy with his mergers he does not even question the timeline. Just keep quiet and I will wire the extra 50 grand for your Porsche deposit tomorrow." Jamal stared at the wall. He read the words, "venture capitalist idiot." He looked at the financial confirmation showing his own money being funneled to a 24-year-old fitness model. The ultimate humiliation was laid bare for everyone to see, but Jamal handled it with the icy, ruthless detachment of a man who destroyed companies for a living. He turned his back on Brittany completely. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and walked toward the private elevator, leaving the wreckage of my family behind him without a second glance. William stood paralyzed, staring at the glowing wall. The complex, horrifying math finally crystallized in his mind. He saw the text messages. He saw the money flowing out to Miami. He realized Jamal was 100% gone. The safety net was officially destroyed. The billionaire bailout his entire future relied upon had just walked onto an elevator. The $2 million Brittany had embezzled was gone, wasted on luxury cars and rent for a stranger. The $500,000 loan they had secured using my stolen Social Security number was actively sitting on an FBI desk. The Connecticut estate was legally mine. The federal wire fraud charges were inescapable. William was looking down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. Absolute poverty and total social ruin, and it was entirely because of the daughter he had worshipped his entire life. William's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged violently against his starched collar. He let out a primal, furious roar and lunged across the kitchen. Catherine shrieked his name, throwing her hands up, but she was entirely too late. William grabbed Brittany by the shoulder, his fingers digging into her silk dress as he jerked her violently around to face him. He drew his arm back with terrifying speed and delivered a brutal, open-handed slap directly across her face. The crack of his palm striking her cheek echoed like a gunshot through the penthouse. Brittany screamed, stumbling backward and crashing hard into the marble island, clutching her stinging face. "You ruined everything," William roared, his voice shaking the glass fixtures above them. "You greedy, stupid, reckless child, you destroyed us. You sent us to prison for a Miami gigolo." Brittany hit the floor hard, her carefully curated influencer image crumbling into a pathetic pile of sobbing silk and ruined makeup. She clutched her blistering red cheek, staring up at her father with wide, terrified eyes. For a fraction of a second, the penthouse was dead silent save for the ragged, frantic breathing of my parents. Then, the dam broke. The delicate high society facade they had spent decades building shattered completely, revealing the venomous vipers writhing underneath. Catherine lunged not at me but at her husband. She shoved both hands hard against William's chest, her designer rings flashing under the recessed lighting. "You swore to me the shell companies were untraceable!" Catherine shrieked, her voice stripping away any remaining shred of country club elegance. "You told me you hired the best offshore accountants. You said using Cassidy's social security number was a temporary placeholder, a perfectly safe bridge loan that would never bounce back to us. You sloppy, incompetent fool. You left a paper trail straight to my front door." William stumbled backward, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He batted his wife's hands away with a violent swipe, his patriarchal authority dissolving into raw panic. "I built a bulletproof financial bridge for a legitimate tech startup." William roared back, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger at the woman sobbing on the floor. "I committed federal fraud to fund a company I did not commit federal fraud, so this reckless, ungrateful parasite could buy solid gold watches for a fitness instructor." He kicked a piece of the shattered baccarat crystal vase across the floor, sending it skittering toward Brittany. $2 million! William screamed, his voice cracking under the sheer magnitude of their ruin. "You squandered our entire survival fund on a Miami gigolo. You were supposed to marry Jamal. You were supposed to secure the trust fund. Instead, you played house with a 24-year-old child and dragged us straight to federal prison." Brittany scrambled backward until her back hit the base of the limestone wall. She looked between her raging father and her hyperventilating mother, realizing instantly that her status as the untouchable golden child had been permanently revoked. She had no protectors left. Cornered, terrified, and bleeding mascara, she defaulted to the only defense mechanism she had ever known. She pointed her venom at me. She pushed herself up onto shaking legs, her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly malice. She leveled a trembling finger directly at my face. "You did this!" Brittany shrieked, her voice tearing through the room. "You set me up! You audited those accounts just to find a way to destroy me. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter spinster. You sit in your sad, empty apartment auditing other people's money because you have absolutely nothing of your own. No man wants you. No one loves you. So you had to ruin my life just to feel something." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I simply stood behind the cool marble of the kitchen island, my hands resting lightly on my leather briefcase, and watched them tear each other apart. For 29 years, I had served as the designated shock absorber for this exact brand of toxic fallout. When Brittany wrecked her first car driving under the influence at 16, William had blamed me for not taking away her keys, grounding me for 3 months, while he quietly bought her a brand new convertible. When Catherine's vanity charity gala went bankrupt due to her own rampant embezzlement, she told her social circle I had mismanaged the donation ledgers. I had spent my entire life standing in the center of their roaring fires, silently absorbing the blame to keep their fragile ecosystem intact. They always needed a scapegoat to survive their own incompetence. But today, the scapegoat was legally untouchable, standing on the other side of a bulletproof financial audit. Without me there to absorb the impact, their rage had nowhere to go but inward. I watched my mother physically shove my father again, screaming about the eviction notices. I watched my father scream back about ruined credit lines and squandered fortunes. I watched my sister sob hysterically, realizing her looks could no longer buy her way out of a felony. They were starving wolves locked in a cage, finally feeding on the only meat left available to them. Through the absolute chaos, a calm, deliberate movement caught my eye. Jamal had not left the penthouse. He had merely stepped away from the screaming match, retreating to the quiet alcove near the private elevator doors. His tailored suit was unruffled, his posture rigid and commanding. He held his smartphone pressed firmly against his ear. The screaming in the kitchen was deafening, but Jamal's deep, resonant voice carried through the space with the chilling authority of an executioner reading a final sentence. "Wall Street SEC Enforcement Division," Jamal said into the receiver, his tone entirely devoid of mercy. "I need an immediate dispatch to my location. I have a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and identity theft case." The words multi-million-dollar wire fraud hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The sheer magnitude of Jamal's phone call acted like a bucket of ice water thrown over a raging fire. The vicious screaming free-for-all in the kitchen ceased instantly. William froze, his hand still raised from striking his golden child. Brittany's hysterical sobbing hitched in her throat. Catherine slowly turned her head away from her husband. The manic, violent energy that had just propelled her to physically attack William vanished. Her perfectly lifted features slackened into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. She looked at Jamal, who was calmly providing the building's security clearance codes to the federal agent on the other end of the line. Then her eyes snapped to me. The transformation was instantaneous and sickeningly familiar. The righteous fury melted away, replaced by the trembling, fragile vulnerability of a desperate mother. Catherine did not just walk toward me. She collapsed. Her knees hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, and she practically crawled across the broken glass and crushed orchids to reach the kitchen island. "Cassidy!" "Please," Catherine wailed, her voice cracking with a perfectly calibrated tremor. She reached up and wrapped her manicured hands tightly around my knees, her fingers digging into the fabric of my tailored trousers. "You have to stop him. You are the only one he listens to. You are the only one who understands the numbers. Tell him it was a clerical error. Tell him we will pay it all back. Please, my baby, you cannot let them send your father and your sister to a federal penitentiary." Looking down at the woman sobbing into my legs, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no lingering desire to be the good daughter. I was simply transported back to a stifling July afternoon when I was 14 years old. We had been summering at the Cape. Brittany, who was 17 at the time, had stolen my father's pristine vintage Jaguar to go to a beach bonfire with her older friends. She brought the car back at 3 in the morning with a shattered headlight, a completely destroyed front bumper, and a police cruiser following right behind her. She had been drinking. The officer was ready to arrest her. Catherine had rushed out onto the lawn in her silk robe. Instead of reprimanding Brittany, she had pulled me out of the front door, dropping to her knees on the damp grass directly in front of me. She had grabbed my hands, crying those exact same desperate, heavy tears. She begged me to tell the officer that I had taken the car on a joyride. She pleaded that a DUI would ruin Brittany's chances of getting into a top-tier sorority, that Brittany's future was too bright to be ruined by one tiny mistake. She promised I would only get a slap on the wrist because of my age. I had taken the fall. I had spent my entire high school career grounded, working off the damages in my father's office, carrying the label of the reckless delinquent daughter, while Brittany was crowned homecoming queen. Catherine's tears had been the currency she used to purchase my silent suffering. Now, 20 years later, she was trying to spend that exact same currency to buy her way out of a federal indictment. "You are family," Catherine pleaded, shaking my knees to force me to look at her. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, jagged rivers. "We are your blood. You have to protect us. I know we have had our differences, but we can fix this. We can be a real family now. Just go over there and take the phone out of his hand. Tell him you made a mistake on the audit. You can fix the paperwork. You can do anything, Cassidy. You are so smart." I stared down at her hands. The desperation in her grip was genuine this time, entirely stripped of the calculated grace she usually wielded. She truly believed her performance would work. She genuinely thought that after decades of psychological warfare, identity theft, and unapologetic cruelty, I still harbored some pathetic, desperate need for her maternal validation. I did not pull away violently. I did not scream or match the chaotic energy she was throwing at me. I simply reached down and placed my hands over hers. My touch seemed to give her a momentary flash of hope. Catherine looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide and expectant, waiting for the obedient scapegoat daughter to fall back into line and absorb the blast. Instead, I dug my thumbs into her knuckles and pried her fingers off my trousers one by one. I peeled her hands away with absolute clinical precision. I stepped backward, creating a physical boundary between us, forcing her to support her own weight on the floor. The hope in Catherine's eyes shattered, replaced by a dark, dawning realization that her ultimate weapon was completely useless. "I cannot stop him, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of my sister's renewed hyperventilating. Catherine opened her mouth, a fresh sob ready to tear through her throat, but my next words cut her off completely, mostly because it would not make a difference. I continued smoothing the fabric of my trousers. I did not just bring those physical documents here to show Jamal. I like to be thorough. I already forwarded the complete unredacted forensic audit, including all the shell company ledgers and the forged loan applications, directly to the FBI Cybercrime Unit 2 hours ago. William let out a sound that was half gasp, half choke. He stumbled back until he hit the floor-to-ceiling window, clutching his chest. They already have the IP addresses, the bank routing numbers, and the digital signatures you used to steal my identity, I stated, looking directly into my mother's horrified eyes. The evidence is out of my hands, out of Jamal's hands, and officially in federal jurisdiction. As if on cue, the faint, high-pitched wail of sirens pierced the silence of the penthouse. The sound drifted up from the busy Manhattan streets far below, growing steadily louder, multiplying in number, and cutting through the evening air with absolute terrifying certainty. The wail of the sirens grew from a distant faint echo into a deafening mechanical roar that vibrated through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse. Red and blue emergency lights began flashing aggressively against the surrounding skyscrapers, painting the sleek modern room in harsh, unforgiving strokes of color. The sound was a physical weight pressing down on my family. Catherine remained on her knees on the floor, her mouth opening and closing in rapid succession like a suffocating fish. She looked from me to the windows, her mind completely short-circuiting as the reality of federal intervention crashed down upon her carefully constructed world. A heavy, authoritative pounding hammered against the solid oak front doors. It was a rhythmic, commanding series of strikes that demanded immediate compliance, shaking the expensive artwork hanging in the foyer. Federal Bureau of Investigation opened the door. A deep voice boomed from the corridor, entirely muffled, yet terrifyingly clear. William did not freeze. While Catherine knelt paralyzed by shock and Brittany whimpered against the base of the marble island, William reacted with the honed instinct of a seasoned coward. He spun away from the window, his eyes darting frantically across the room like a trapped rat searching for a crack in the baseboards. He bypassed the main entrance completely and made a desperate silent dash toward the kitchen pantry. Concealed behind the pantry was a small, discreet service elevator meant exclusively for catering staff and maintenance crews. It bypassed the main lobby and led directly to the underground loading dock. Watching his broad shoulders hunch as he scurried toward the secret exit triggered a visceral, deeply buried memory. I was 10 years old, standing in the foyer of our first suburban home holding a worn stuffed bear, while two men in cheap suits pounded on our front door holding a bank foreclosure notice. William had packed a single leather duffel bag in the dead of night, kissed Catherine quickly on the cheek, and slipped out the back door. He had claimed he needed to secure temporary lodging for us, promising to return by nightfall. He vanished for 3 weeks. He left my mother to deal with the aggressive eviction officers, the repossession trucks, and the judging stares of our neighbors, while he stayed in a comfortable hotel 2 towns over, waiting for the dust to settle. When my high school tuition check bounced, resulting in me being pulled out of class and humiliated in the principal's office in front of my peers, William had suddenly booked a last-minute golf trip to Florida. He was a man who engineered catastrophic explosions and then reliably sprinted for the nearest fire escape, perfectly content to let his wife and daughters burn in the inferno he had created. He was doing it again right now. But this time, the fire escape was permanently blocked. As William reached his trembling hand out to press the glowing call button for the service elevator, Jamal stepped effortlessly into his path. Jamal did not look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed, staring down at my father with the cold evaluation of a predator, analyzing a particularly weak prey. He planted his large frame directly in front of the stainless steel doors, folding his arms across his chest and creating an immovable barrier. "Going somewhere?" William Jamal asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the chaos of the sirens. William stammered, his face pale, sweat beading heavily on his forehead. "I just need to make a phone call, Jamal. I need privacy. Attorney-client privilege. You understand how these things work. I will be right back up." The agents outside are here for you, Jamal stated, not moving an inch. You are going to stay right here and face them. For the first time in your pathetic life, you are going to stand in the room while the consequences of your actions arrive. A thunderous crash echoed through the foyer as the front doors were forced open by a specialized breaching ram. Heavy tactical boots pounded against the imported hardwood floors. A dozen armed individuals swarmed the penthouse in a matter of seconds. NYPD officers in tactical gear fanned out to secure the perimeter of the luxury apartment while federal agents in dark windbreakers emblazoned with bright yellow FBI lettering stormed the main living area. The sheer organized force of their entry sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the room. "Hands where we can see them right now," a lead agent barked, sweeping his gaze across the room. Catherine let out a shrill, piercing scream and threw her hands over her head. She collapsed flat onto her stomach amidst the broken glass and crushed orchids sobbing hysterically into the hardwood. Jamal calmly raised his hands, stepping away from William and gesturing toward the kitchen island where the black folder rested. I stood completely still, my hands resting clearly on the cool marble counter, projecting absolute cooperation. Two heavily armored agents instantly surrounded William. They grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back, and forced him face first against the wall. He whimpered loudly, protesting that there had been a massive misunderstanding, claiming he was a respected member of the community who regularly donated to police charities. The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward into the center of the kitchen. She held a thick stack of printed warrants in her left hand. Her eyes swept past William and Catherine, scanning the room with clinical, terrifying efficiency. "We have federal warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement," the agent announced, her voice easily cutting through William's pathetic, breathless protests. "I am looking for the principal founder and listed CEO of Green Eco Consulting." Brittany had been hyperventilating in the corner, her face smeared with ruined makeup, watching her parents get surrounded and neutralized by armed officers. The terror in her eyes was absolute, raw, and primal. But when the agent asked for the founder of Green Eco, a terrifying shift occurred. Survival instinct kicked in. The exact same survival instinct Catherine had drilled into her for 29 years. Deflect, blame, sacrifice whoever is standing closest to the fire. Brittany pushed herself violently away from the wall. She raised a shaking manicured finger and pointed it directly across the kitchen island. She did not point at her father, the man who had forged the documents and orchestrated the financial theft. She did not point at her mother, the woman who had managed the stolen funds and covered up the paper trail. She pointed directly at my chest. "It is her!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the static of the police radios and the weeping of our parents. "She is the mastermind. She forced us to do it." The lead FBI agent slowly turned her gaze away from William, her eyes locking onto me. The tactical officers in the room shifted their stances, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. The absolute silence that followed Brittany's screeching accusation was thick and suffocating, broken only by the crackle of police radios. Catherine saw the slight hesitation in the agent's eyes and immediately seized the opening. The desperate crawling victim act vanished, replaced instantly by the vicious calculating matriarch I knew so well. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the shards of broken crystal crunching beneath her designer heels, and rushed to stand protectively in front of her golden child. "Yes," Catherine shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "It is true, Cassidy is a corporate financial auditor. She understands banking security protocols and offshore accounts. She has the technical skills to forge these documents. She despises us because she has always been jealous of Brittany. She set this entire nightmare up to frame her own family." William, still pinned against the wall by two heavily armored agents, caught onto his wife's desperate lifeline. He cranked his neck around to face the lead agent. "She is a sociopath," William choked out. His face flushed dark red against the paint. "She used my private computer. She planted the digital signatures. We are the victims here." I did not raise my hands in defense. I did not shout or beg the agents to believe me. I simply stood behind the cool marble of the kitchen island, staring at the three of them. Their coordinated betrayal was executed with the flawless, practiced precision of a family that had done this 1,000 times before. As Catherine launched into a tearful, frantic monologue about how I had allegedly stolen their passwords during a Thanksgiving visit, my mind pulled me sharply back to the spring of my junior year in high school. Brittany had been failing advanced placement history, a grade that threatened to derail her early admission to Yale. Desperate and entitled, she had slipped into Mr. Harrison's classroom during lunch and stolen his personal laptop to access the final exam answer key. When the school administration launched a massive investigation threatening expulsion for the culprit, Brittany had collapsed into a sobbing mess in our living room. Catherine had not punished her. Instead, while I was at my after-school tutoring job, Catherine took the stolen laptop and shoved it deep under my mattress. The very next morning, Catherine called the school principal claiming she had found stolen property while cleaning my room. I was pulled out of calculus by a security guard. I was interrogated, suspended for 2 weeks, and had my spotless academic record permanently stained. When I confronted my mother crying and begging her to tell the truth, she simply adjusted her pearl earrings and told me that Brittany's future was too valuable to sacrifice over a minor misunderstanding, and that I needed to learn to be a supportive sister. They had always treated my life as a disposable shield for Brittany's mistakes. They committed the crimes, planted the evidence on their designated scapegoat, and cried tears of innocent betrayal. It was their favorite game. But we were not in high school anymore, and the FBI did not hand out 2-week suspensions. "Ma'am," the lead agent said, her voice sharp and commanding as she stepped toward the kitchen island. "Step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them." "Are you Cassidy Wilson?" "I am," I replied, my voice steady and perfectly clear. I took one deliberate step back, keeping my hands entirely visible. The agent unclipped a pair of handcuffs from her belt, her eyes never leaving my face. "We are going to need you to come with us for questioning regarding the fraudulent wire transfers authorized under Green Eco Consulting." Catherine let out a loud, theatrical sob of relief, burying her face into Brittany's shoulder. William actually smiled, a sickening, triumphant smirk spreading across his face, even as the officers held him against the wall. They truly believed they had won. They believed the old playbook had worked exactly as intended. Before the agent could take another step toward me, a deep, resonant voice halted her in her tracks. "That will not be necessary, Agent." Jamal stepped away from the service elevator. He moved with a smooth, lethal grace, striding directly into the center of the kitchen. The sheer authority radiating from him caused the tactical officers to instinctively part ways, allowing him to reach the lead agent. He did not look at William, Catherine, or Brittany. They were entirely beneath his notice. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a small silver flash drive. He held it out along with his unlocked smartphone, offering both directly to the lead FBI agent. "I am the primary investor in Greenico." Jamal stated, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or manipulation. "I initiated the federal inquiry. Here are the unredacted IP logs, the original wire transfer signatures, and the recorded phone calls between William and the offshore accounts. The fraud originated exclusively from the parents' Connecticut estate." The lead FBI agent took the flash drive from Jamal without breaking eye contact with William. She passed the small silver device to a tactical tech specialist, who immediately plugged it into a secured field terminal. It took less than 60 seconds for the agent to nod. The digital footprint was undeniable. William's private network at the Connecticut estate had authorized every single fraudulent transfer. Brittany's pathetic attempt to frame me dissolved into thin air, leaving her standing there with her finger pointing at absolutely nothing. The lead agent turned back to my father. "William Arthur Adams, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and federal embezzlement." The words triggered a mechanical, synchronized movement among the officers. 2 tactical agents grabbed William's arms, pulling them firmly behind his back. The cold, heavy ratchet of stainless steel handcuffs echoed sharply across the marble kitchen. The metallic clicks were incredibly final. It was the sound of a carefully curated empire snapping shut. Catherine shrieked as an officer approached her. She clutched her silk blouse as if the expensive fabric could somehow repel federal authority. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly as the agent secured her wrists. "Do you know who we are? You are making a catastrophic mistake. I am on the board of the Metropolitan Arts Committee. You cannot put these on me. They are going to bruise." Her protests were entirely ignored. The officer spun her around, forcing her wrists together and snapping the cuffs shut with clinical efficiency. Beside her, Brittany had gone completely limp. All the venom and fight had drained out of her the moment Jamal handed over the drive. She did not struggle when the agent secured her hands behind her back. She simply stared at the floor, crying silently as her expensive mascara dripped onto the collar of her designer dress. "You have the right to remain silent." The lead agent recited her voice, projecting absolute authority over the chaotic sobbing of my family. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda warning was something my parents had only ever heard on television, usually while sipping expensive wine and passing judgment on the moral failings of the lower classes. Hearing those rights read directly to them in their own multi-million-dollar penthouse was a psychological breaking point. As the agents began physically marching them toward the private elevator, Catherine's panic shifted from the reality of prison to the absolute terror of public humiliation. "Oh my God!" "The lobby," Catherine gasped, her eyes widening in pure horror. "The doorman is down there, the neighbors. William the Montgomerys are hosting a dinner party on the 5th floor tonight. Everyone will see us. We cannot go through the lobby. You have to take us out through the service garage." The sheer irony of her panic was staggering. For my entire life, Catherine had weaponized neighborhood gossip like a blood sport. I clearly remembered the spring when the husband of our next-door neighbor in Connecticut was investigated by the SEC for insider trading. Long before the man was even formally charged, Catherine had organized a vicious, relentless smear campaign. She had called an emergency meeting of the country club board, claiming that associating with criminals was a disease that infected the entire community. She had petitioned to have their family expelled, publicly shamed their teenage children, and stood on her pristine front lawn whispering venomous rumors to anyone who would listen. Catherine lived for the destruction of other people's reputations, firmly believing her own family was utterly untouchable. Now she was the spectacle. She was the neighborhood scandal being dragged out in steel chains. The agents ignored her frantic pleading. They guided William, Catherine, and Brittany out of the kitchen and into the grand foyer. I walked slowly behind them, picking up my half-full cup of coffee from the dining table. I wanted to watch every single second of their departure. The private elevator chimed, the polished brass doors sliding open to reveal the wood-paneled cab. The officers shoved William inside first. His head hung low, his face completely drained of the arrogant, patriarchal authority he had wielded over me for nearly 3 decades. Brittany stumbled in next, hiding her face behind her tangled blonde hair, absolutely terrified of the cameras she knew would be waiting outside the building. But Catherine dug her heels into the expensive Persian rug just outside the elevator doors. She fought against the grip of the federal agent, twisting her body around to look back at me one last time. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The desperation was gone, replaced entirely by the toxic, spiteful matriarch who could never accept defeat gracefully. "You did this to us." Catherine spat, her voice echoing through the foyer like a curse. "You orchestrated this entire disaster because you are bitter and hollow. You are officially uninvited from Thanksgiving. Do you hear me, Cassidy? You are entirely cut out of the will. You are dead to us." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted exceptionally good. I lowered the cup, meeting my mother's furious gaze with absolute unbothered calm. "That is fine, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly into the confined space of the elevator. "The bank forecloses on your Connecticut kitchen on Thursday morning anyway." The agent shoved Catherine forward, breaking her resistance. She stumbled into the elevator cab, her eyes wide with fresh, paralyzing shock as the reality of her total financial ruin finally registered. The heavy brass doors began to slide shut, cutting off her final, breathless gasp. The lock clicked, the cables whined, and the elevator descended, taking my family down to face the exact world they had spent their entire lives judging. The heavy brass doors of the private elevator clicked shut, swallowing the frantic shrieks of my mother and the heavy boots of the tactical team. Suddenly, the sprawling Manhattan penthouse was completely devoid of oxygen. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. It rang in my ears, a stark, jarring contrast to the decades of screaming gaslighting and manufactured chaos that had defined my entire existence with them. I looked around the kitchen. Shattered baccarat crystal glittered across the imported hardwood. Crushed orchids lay trampled near the island, mixed with the spilled remnants of Catherine's expensive foundation. I finally let out a long, slow breath, feeling the rigid tension leave my shoulders. Jamal exhaled sharply, running a hand over his closely cropped hair. He stepped over a jagged shard of glass, moving toward the custom mahogany wet bar tucked into the far corner of the living room. He did not ask for permission. He reached past the overturned bottles of cheap champagne Catherine had bought to celebrate their stolen wealth, retrieving an untouched bottle of Macallan and two heavy crystal tumblers. He poured two generous measures and walked back to the kitchen island, sliding one glass across the cool marble toward me. I took it, the amber liquid burning a pleasant grounding trail down my throat. We stood there for a long moment, two survivors emerging from the wreckage of a Category 5 hurricane named Brittany. The intense adversarial energy that had initially defined our interaction melted away, replaced by a mutual unspoken respect. I have dealt with hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and ruthless boardroom brawls, Jamal said, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence. But your family operates on a level of pathological delusion that defies basic logic. How did you survive them for 29 years? I gripped the tumbler, staring at the amber reflection. By making myself entirely uninteresting to them. I took another sip, the memories of my brutal climb up the corporate ladder flashing behind my eyes. I did not tell Jamal about the nights I slept under my desk at the accounting firm, running purely on stale coffee and sheer willpower to pass my licensing exams. I did not need to. I explained it through the actions I took to survive my family's relentless greed. 5 years ago, I earned my first major six-figure bonus, I said, setting the glass down on the marble. I made the mistake of buying myself a custom-tailored coat and wearing it to Thanksgiving dinner. William saw the designer label. By dessert, he had cornered me in the hallway demanding a $50,000 bridge loan because Brittany had maxed out 3 credit cards in his name and the bank was threatening to sue. When I refused, Catherine told the entire extended family that I had stolen money from my firm and was under internal investigation. Jamal shook his head in absolute disgust, taking a slow drink from his tumbler. From that day on, I continued, my voice steady and cold. I hid every promotion. I drove a 10-year-old sedan to family events. I wore off the rack suits and scuffed heels. I let them believe I was a pathetic, low-level drone auditing spreadsheets in a windowless cubicle. It was the only way to protect the wealth I was building. If they knew I had capital, they would have drained me dry to fund Brittany's lifestyle. I played the failure so they would leave my bank accounts alone. Instead, they stole your identity to drain me dry. Jamal noted, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. They underestimated you. Horribly. I protect my assets, Jamal, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. They made the fatal mistake of using my social security number to build their fraudulent shell companies. I simply neutralized the threat. Jamal set his empty glass on the marble island. His posture shifted, the relaxed demeanor of a fellow survivor vanishing as the razor-sharp businessman returned to the surface. He walked over to the leather briefcase he had left resting near the foyer console table. He popped the brass latches, the sharp clicks echoing in the quiet penthouse. When my compliance team caught the initial anomalies in the Greenico accounts, they told me it would take a month to trace the shell companies and legally prove the embezzlement, Jamal said, pulling out a thick leather-bound folder. He walked back to the kitchen island and dropped it squarely in front of me. Your forensic audit unraveled a labyrinth of offshore accounts in less than 48 hours. He continued, tapping his index finger against the heavy leather cover. You bypassed 3 layers of encrypted firewalls, matched the routing numbers to William's private estate, and handed me a bulletproof federal case with a neat little bow on top. You did what an entire team of corporate lawyers could not do in a fraction of the time. I looked down at the folder, then back up at his dark, evaluating eyes. I am very good at my job. You are ruthless, Cassidy, Jamal said, leaning forward and resting his hands on the marble, closing the distance between us. You are clinically detached, operationally brilliant, and you do not let emotion cloud your judgment, even when your own flesh and blood is involved. Those are exactly the traits I need to protect my investments. He flipped the heavy leather folder open, revealing a dense legal contract printed on premium stock paper. My venture capital firm needs a new chief risk officer, Jamal stated, his voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising authority. I am offering you a 5-year, $10 million exclusive retainer. We start Monday morning. I accepted Jamal's offer before the private elevator had even reached the ground floor of the penthouse building. The transition from being a hunted, undervalued auditor to the chief risk officer of a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm happened with dizzying speed. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday vanished in a blur of executive onboarding, intense strategic briefings, and migrating my proprietary risk assessment algorithms to Jamal's heavily encrypted servers. I traded my cramped windowless cubicle for a sweeping corner office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. By Thursday morning, the city was dead quiet. It was Thanksgiving Day, a holiday that typically mandated forced family gatherings, performative gratitude, and exhausting social obligations. While millions of people were currently basting turkeys and arguing over stuffing recipes, I sat alone in my massive new office. The silence was not lonely. It was the most profound, luxurious peace I had ever experienced. I wore a simple cashmere sweater, cradling a mug of black coffee, watching the gray November clouds roll heavily over the skyscrapers. A sharp, distinct chime from my secure desktop terminal broke the silence. I turned my leather executive chair toward the dual monitors. An encrypted email had just arrived from my private asset management attorney. The subject line contained only a case number and a single word indicating completion. I set my coffee down on the polished mahogany desk, my pulse steady, and clicked the decryption link. The official notification filled the screen. The legal battle was entirely over before William and Catherine could even secure bail. Due to the immediate freezing of William's assets by the federal government and the catastrophic default clauses triggered by his criminal indictment, the bank had aggressively accelerated the foreclosure on their prized Connecticut estate. Catherine's frantic, desperate motions to halt the proceedings using a public defender had been laughed out of federal court. The property had been successfully seized. Scrolling down, I read the final confirmation. The deed had been legally and irrevocably transferred to Apex Solutions, the anonymous corporate holding company I had established 3 years ago. I now held absolute ownership of the sprawling, custom-built mansion that had served as the physical monument to my parents' arrogance. Seeing the digital seal on the property deed triggered a violent, involuntary memory. I looked at the date flashing in the bottom corner of my screen. Thursday, November 26th. 14 years ago on this exact holiday, I was 15 years old. William and Catherine were hosting their annual Thanksgiving gala for the neighborhood elite, a meticulously curated event designed solely to flaunt their wealth and mock the lesser families in their social circle. Brittany, who was 19 at the time, and furious that a visiting cousin had worn a more expensive designer dress, had thrown a violent tantrum in the kitchen. In her blind rage, she grabbed a heavy crystal pitcher of red wine and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the imported Italian marble backsplash, sending a tidal wave of dark burgundy, completely ruining the massive, perfectly roasted centerpiece turkey sitting on the counter. Catherine had rushed into the kitchen upon hearing the crash, her face pale with panic over her ruined menu. Without missing a beat, Brittany collapsed against the refrigerator, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. She claimed I had shoved her into the counter because I was jealous of her dress. I made the fatal mistake of defending myself. I looked my mother in the eye and called Brittany a liar. William entered the kitchen just in time to hear my defiance. The punishment for disrupting their perfect narrative and talking back to the golden child was immediate and severe. William grabbed me by the collar of my thin wool sweater, physically dragging me through the kitchen, down the hallway, and out the heavy mahogany front door. He shoved me onto the freezing stone porch and slammed the door. the deadbolt engaged with a heavy metallic thud that vibrated through the floorboards. I sat on that stone porch for 6 hours in the freezing, relentless November rain. The temperature hovered just above freezing, the icy water soaking through my clothes and chilling me straight to the bone. Through the large bay windows of the formal dining room, I watched my family. I watched William carve the unsoiled side of the ruined turkey. I watched Catherine laugh and pour expensive champagne for their wealthy guests. I watched Brittany smile brightly, accepting compliments on her flawless behavior. I sat shivering violently in the dark, hugging my knees to my chest, completely erased from their reality. The physical memory of that biting, unforgiving cold had lived in my joints for over a decade. I blinked, bringing my focus back to the glowing monitors in my warm, silent office. The cold was gone. The stone porch was a memory. The people who had locked me out were currently sitting in separate federal holding cells, wearing standard-issue jumpsuits, eating processed cafeteria food off plastic trays. I scrolled to the very bottom of the attorney's email. There was a secondary document attached awaiting my digital authorization. When you acquire a multi-million-dollar property in a highly coveted Connecticut suburb, the standard financial protocol is to flip the asset. You hire a luxury real estate broker, stage the imported kitchen, and sell the estate to another wealthy family obsessed with maintaining a flawless high society image. You cash out the equity and walk away. I was not going to sell it. I was not going to let another family walk across those Italian marble floors or host dinner parties in that formal dining room. The house was a monument to toxicity built on stolen funds and sustained by psychological abuse. I opened the secondary document. It was a commercial demolition order. I pulled up my digital signature pad. With a few quick, decisive strokes, I authorized a heavy machinery crew to roll onto the pristine, manicured lawns of the estate at sunrise on Monday morning. They were instructed to bulldoze the custom archways, smash through the bay windows, and level the entire sprawling structure until there was absolutely nothing left but dirt and dust. I typed a quick reply to my attorney, attaching the signed demolition order. I added one final instruction. Once the land was cleared and leveled, the entire 3-acre plot was to be legally donated free and clear to a local nonprofit organization that built transitional housing for women escaping domestic abuse. I hit send, watching the confirmation bar load across the screen. I picked up my coffee, took another slow sip, and turned my chair back to look out over the city, savoring the absolute perfection of a completely quiet Thanksgiving. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, the warmth of my coffee mug radiating against my palms. The Manhattan skyline was a tapestry of gray and steel, perfectly still on this holiday morning. The profound silence of my new office was broken only by the sharp, jarring buzz of my personal cell phone resting on the mahogany desk. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed an automated alert from the Metropolitan Correctional Center. I tapped the screen to accept the charges. An automated sterile voice prompted the connection, followed immediately by the sound of ragged, hyperventilating sobs echoing against hard concrete. It was not the performative, delicate crying I was accustomed to hearing from her. This was the raw, primal gasping of someone whose reality had just violently collapsed. "Cassidy! Cassidy, please, are you there?" Brittany's voice was hoarse, stripped entirely of its usual arrogant lilt. She sounded small, terrified, and utterly broken. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor. "I am here, Brittany. You have to help me," she pleaded, the desperation bleeding through the crackling, static-filled phone line. "It is a nightmare in here. They took my clothes. They put me in this freezing cell with people who terrify me. I have not slept in 3 days. The food is inedible. Please, Cassidy, you have to post my bail." "Where is your devoted fiancé?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. I would assume your high-profile Instagram model would be rushing to your rescue to protect his future wife. A fresh wave of pathetic sobbing echoed through the receiver. "He left." The second the FBI froze my accounts and seized my car, he stopped answering my calls. His management team blocked my number entirely. "He packed his things, and he is gone, Cassidy. He is completely gone. And William and Catherine, I inquired, letting the names of our parents roll off my tongue with clinical detachment. They turned on me. Brittany gasped, her voice dropping to a frantic, disbelieving whisper. We met with the public defenders yesterday. Mom and Dad are trying to cut a plea deal to save themselves. They told the federal prosecutors that I orchestrated the entire shell company structure. They told them I manipulated the offshore transfers to fund my lifestyle, and that they were just victims of my greed. They are trying to give me the maximum sentence so they can get leniency. The judge set my bail at $5 million because we are considered extreme flight risks. I have absolutely nothing left. Listening to her rapid, panicked breathing over the receiver, I realized I was witnessing a monumental historic shift in her psychology. For exactly 29 years, Brittany had floated through life completely insulated from the concept of cause and effect. When she crashed her first luxury SUV into a parked car while driving intoxicated at 17, William had quietly paid off the local police chief and bought her a newer, faster model the very next week. When she intentionally ruined the credit score of her college roommate out of pure spite, Catherine had buried the girl's family in aggressive legal threats until they backed down and moved away. Brittany had been conditioned from birth to believe that the universe existed solely to absorb her mistakes. She lived in a reality where every fire she started was immediately extinguished by our parents' money and relentless manipulation. Now trapped in a cold concrete box stripped of her designer armor and her enablers, the absolute horror of real-world consequences was crushing her alive. She was realizing for the first time in her pampered, insulated existence that no one was coming to save her. Her parents had done what they always did when faced with a threat. They found a scapegoat to sacrifice to the flames. Only this time the scapegoat was her. Cassidy, I know you have money. Brittany begged, her voice degrading into a pathetic whine that grated against my ears. I know you work for that billionaire now. Mom told me you bought the Connecticut house. Please, I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. I will publicly apologize on camera. Just get me out of this concrete box. I cannot survive in here. I will not survive. I set my coffee mug down on the desk. I looked out the massive windows of my corner office, watching a single solitary hawk glide over the silent city streets below. I thought about the 15-year-old girl freezing on a stone porch on Thanksgiving. I thought about the stolen laptop, the destroyed credit, the decades of systematic erasure, and the endless stream of humiliations I had endured to keep their fragile egos intact. You always needed to be the center of attention, I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing in the vast, quiet space of my office. You wanted the spotlight. You wanted the fame, the wealth, and the perfect high society image. Please, she whimpered, the sound pathetic and hollow against the cold reality of her situation. You told me I wasn't fit for your high-profile life, I stated, delivering the words with chilling absolute finality. Enjoy your new one. I pressed the red button on my screen. The line went dead. I placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany, permanently severing the toxic cord. I left the device resting face down on the polished mahogany desk, the dark screen reflecting the rolling gray clouds outside my office window. The silence that instantly reclaimed the room was not empty. It was a living, breathing testament to my permanent liberation. For the first time in 29 years, the crushing, suffocating weight of the family name no longer rested on my shoulders. I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase, grabbed my cashmere coat, and walked out of the corporate building into the crisp, quiet Manhattan afternoon. By the time my private elevator doors opened directly into the foyer of my penthouse, the rich, savory aromas of roasted garlic, fresh sage, and browned butter wrapped around me like a physical embrace. I stepped out of my heels, letting my bare feet sink into the plush runner rug, and walked toward the sound of overlapping voices and genuine unscripted laughter ringing from the kitchen. Thanksgiving in the Connecticut estate had always been a highly orchestrated military operation disguised as a holiday. Catherine used to patrol the formal dining room with a silver measuring tape, ensuring the crystal water goblets were exactly 2 inches from the edge of the table. We were strictly forbidden from interacting with the hired catering staff. We were expected to sit with rigid posture rehearsing our carefully scripted answers about William's latest business acquisitions or Brittany's newest modeling contracts. The food was always secondary to the performance of extreme wealth. The tension at that table had been so thick it made it difficult to swallow. One wrong word, one accidental clink of a fork against china, would result in weeks of psychological warfare and public humiliation. Today, my penthouse kitchen was a sanctuary of joyful, unapologetic chaos. Sarah, my former auditing assistant, who had risked her own early career to help me quietly secure the encrypted shell company data, was laughing uproariously while mashing potatoes in a giant ceramic bowl. David, the senior forensic accountant, who had initially trained me when I was sleeping under my desk to pass my licensing exams, was expertly carving a massive golden brown turkey on the marble island. They were not blood relatives. They did not share my last name or my traumatic history. They were the people who had stood by me when I had absolutely zero leverage, and they were the only family I would ever need. The front intercom chimed with a soft, melodic tone. A moment later, Jamal walked into the penthouse. He had traded his usual ruthless boardroom armor for a tailored dark sweater and charcoal slacks, carrying a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that likely cost more than my first sedan. He handed the bottle to David with a warm, familiar greeting before turning his sharp, evaluating eyes toward me. "You look remarkably relaxed for a woman who just finalized a corporate takeover and permanently neutralized a federal fraud ring in the exact same week," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying easily over the jazz playing softly from the ceiling speakers. I poured him a glass of sparkling water, sliding it across the cool marble of the island. "I just had a very clarifying phone conversation," I replied, leaning against the counter. Brittany called from the county holding facility. She wanted me to wire her bail money. Jamal raised a single eyebrow, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face as he took a sip of his water. "And I assume the chief risk officer of my firm calculated that investment to be a catastrophic liability." I met his gaze directly, my expression completely flat. I told her I was not fit for her high-profile life and hung up the phone. Jamal chuckled, a genuine sound of deep, unwavering respect. "You are cold-blooded, Cassidy. It is exactly why you are going to double my asset portfolio by next quarter. Come on, let us eat. I am starving." We moved the feast into the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set with heavy linen and simple white porcelain. There was no baccarat crystal waiting to shatter against the wall. There were no imported orchids waiting to be trampled underfoot by a screaming sibling. There were just towering plates of incredible hot food and the absolute warmth of people who genuinely cared for one another's well-being. I took my seat at the head of the table. I did not feel the need to shrink myself to avoid drawing William's ire. I did not have to wear an oversized off-the-rack sweater to hide my financial success from Catherine's greedy eyes. I wore a tailored silk blouse and let my diamond watch catch the warm light of the modern chandelier above us. As everyone settled into their chairs and filled their plates, the room naturally quieted down. Sarah raised her glass of red wine, looking around the table with a bright smile. "Before we eat, I think a toast is in order," she said, her eyes landing on me with fierce, undeniable loyalty. "To Cassidy, the smartest, most relentless woman I have ever had the privilege of knowing. You pulled yourself out of a total nightmare, and you brought the rest of us up to the top with you." I picked up my own glass, standing up slowly from my chair. The faces looking back at me held no jealousy, no hidden agendas, and no toxic entitlement. I raised my glass higher, looking at the people who had chosen to be here. "To chosen family," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady in the vast room. For years, I was taught that loyalty meant allowing yourself to be drained dry by the people who happened to share your DNA. I was taught that surviving meant staying invisible and playing the failure. But looking at all of you today, I realize that true family does not demand your destruction. True family celebrates your strength. So here is to unshakable boundaries. Here is to protecting what we build. And here is to sweet absolute justice. The glasses met in the center of the table with a resonant musical chime. We drank the rich wine, warming my throat and grounding me in the present moment. I sat back down and picked up my silver fork. The storm was completely over. William and Catherine were locked in a federal nightmare entirely of their own making. Brittany was sitting in a freezing concrete cell, finally learning the harsh, unforgiving reality of consequences. The Connecticut estate was scheduled to become dirt and rubble by Monday morning, soon to be a sanctuary for women who needed a safe place to rebuild their own lives. I looked at the incredible feast in front of me, listening to Jamal debate David over venture capital trends while Sarah laughed at their competitive intensity. I placed a piece of the perfectly roasted turkey into my mouth. The flavor exploded on my tongue, rich, savory, and completely untainted by the anxiety or fear that used to choke me. I turned my head to look out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows framing the dining room. The sun had finally set, and the New York City skyline had ignited into a glittering ocean of millions of lights stretching out endlessly into the dark velvet night. It was my city now. This was my life built brick by brick with my own hands. I chewed slowly, a deep, unwavering smile touching my lips. It was without a single doubt the best Thanksgiving I had ever had. A profound lesson from Cassidy's journey is that our worth is never defined by those who fail to see it. Bloodlines do not obligate us to endure abuse, manipulation, or constant belittlement. True empowerment comes from breaking toxic family cycles, establishing ironclad boundaries, and reclaiming your independence. Success is the ultimate justice built not on revenge, but on fiercely prioritizing your own peace and potential over the expectations of a broken family. You must never let anyone dictate your value. Reflect on a time you drew a difficult line to protect your peace. Share your own story and comment below.